Sims, let's go.
Hello, everybody. It's your girl, Miracle Sims, and you're watching the GSL Talk Show. Tonight, we have Dr. David Chotka back to share with us more testimonies and amazing experiences, so stay tuned. Welcome back to the GSL Talk Show. As you guys can see, I am here once again with Dr. David Chotka.
You said it right. Well done.
Yes, I'm doing my best to make sure I say the names correctly. And welcome back. Welcome back to the GSL Talk Show.
Thank you. It's a delight. We really didn't have enough time to talk last time, so this is very gracious of you to have me back so soon.
Oh, well, yeah, no problem. Like I said, it's so funny because every now and then, well, I usually tell everybody, hey, come on back if you want and stuff. There was one time that I had somebody that was like, it was like kind of back to back, kind of came back. But then, it's always nice for people to visit again. So I'm glad you feel, welcome. And, again, you're welcome to come back after this if you want to as well.
Thank you very much. We'll see. We'll see if I have a topic we can cover that I haven't covered in these two.
Sounds like a plan. I know we did mention, not to say let's just jump right into it, but last time you were here, we did mention, or you mentioned something about a story and a rock and things of that nature. And somehow all of that had something to do with sex and whatnot. So
yes,
stay tuned, friends, because apparently we got a lot of good, interesting conversation coming.
Yes, I make sure that I do tell the story. I'd like to backtrack and talk about a little mini revival in my little northern church. It led to the story with the rock. That's how this thing happened. Would you like to hear that? So I've written this book called Healing Prayer, God's Idea. I'll put on people who can see. It's called Healing Prayer. It's a co-write with Reverend Dr. Maxie Dunham. And people always ask me, what is it that brought you to the place where you're writing about that? And there were a lot of moments along the way. But one of them happened in that church. It was a little tiny church. When I arrived, it was a city of 2,500 people total. I mean, the total town. And in the church, there were 5 other churches. So there's not a lot of saints to go around. At any rate, when I arrived there were only 6 people in that church. And it was in a northern community in North Alberta. So if you want cold, we talked about the weather at the start here. There would be 2 weeks of minus 40 below. It was just really, there'd be that cold. And there was a lake in the town, and the lake would freeze 12 feet of ice, and transport trucks would drive across the lake. And that's how cold it got in the winter. It would get to 85, 90 in the summer, but not in the winter. And it had these extreme cold. Anyway, in this little town, and my church began to grow. And actually, it grew through conversion growth. People started to come to the Lord. And as we were doing this, amazing things started to happen. Now, into my church walks this single mom. And she's got 2 young boys. And I'll just be straight with you. The husband was an absolute jerk. And she was looking for a place to belong where she wasn't going to be judged. She had these 2 kids. And back in the day, the way that people treated people who were on the wrong side of that was not very nice. Anyway, the church was welcoming and warm to her. And they embraced her. And I liked the 2 boys. I teased them a lot, and a little bit about boys. You got to throw a baseball and tell them silly jokes and that kind of thing. Anyway, it was only a church of about, at that point, maybe 40, 45, 50 people at the outside. So it was a little small group is what it was. Anyway, bottom line was this lady started to come, and she would have her 2 boys sit in front of her, and she'd stand at the back leaning up against the wall. And I thought, oh, she's watching her 2 kids, But over the course of time, there were sometimes when, one of the kids was out of town or whatever, and she would still stand against the back of the wall. And this lady came to our prayer study. This lady came to the membership class. This lady came to a Bible study, and she would either stand against the wall or lie down on the couch. And we thought, what is this about? And eventually she told us that she had a seriously damaged back. There was trouble with, she was going to have a back fusion. She was in regular chiropractic treatments. And the guy could just make her well enough that she'd be able to work. And she was such a good worker. Her employer put up a stand so that she could use her computer. In those days, it was an electric typewriter, and lean against the wall with a bit of a leaning post, that kind of thing. And they loved her. They thought it was a marvelous girl, but she's had this trouble. Anyway, I was going to the same chiropractor because in those days, I had a bit of a weak back. And I didn't know about good posture and good chairs to sit in. And I had this lousy chair. At any rate, here's what happens. She's in a prayer meeting, and in the room, there's maybe 5 people. There was a nurse who was in charge of obstetrics and gynecology in the local hospital, very bright lady, and a very, very seasoned medical person. There was a helicopter repair guy, because that was a helicopter place that used to, do helicopter stuff to get to isolated fields in the north. There was a Catholic charismatic lady in the room, and there was somebody else whose name I can't remember. But so the 4 of us were there, and there was this lady. Her name was Lorna. She was lying on this couch while we were doing our Bible study, and it was a prayer meeting. And so finally, Brad looked at me, and he said, the helicopter guy said, maybe we should pray for Lorna. And so we said, Lorna, what's going on with your back? And she told us the long story about, a ruptured disc and about having to have a back fusion surgery. She was in terrible trouble. She'd only be without pain if she lay absolutely still or stood up. She couldn't bend her legs. And it was this terrible kind of thing. And she's got these 2 young boys, and no help. Anyway, we start to pray. And the next thing that you know that's happening, the room fills with presence. And the nurse, the medical person in charge of obstetrics and gynecology, this nurse, she begins to just physically shake. And this Catholic charismatic lady, she starts to physically shake. And then my friend Brad, the helicopter pilot, he starts to weep. This is a big guy with muscles. He's starting to cry. And my hand gets fiery hot as I have it on her shoulder. And we said to her, what's going on? And she just said, oh, my spirit is soaring. I just feel the presence of the Lord. And then I did something I've only done twice in my life. I was a young buck, and I'd read about this in the Bible, and I found myself doing this crazy thing. I said, in the name of Jesus, stand up and do deep knee bends. And she leaped off the couch, and she did deep knee bends. Something went snap, and her back was healed. And here's what she did. She ran into the sanctuary and ran around the piano. Then she ran back, and she jumped up and down in front of us. And then this was a Thursday night. So she runs down the street, gets her 2 boys. It was the wintertime. She was 2 blocks away from the church. Then she ran back from the church, and they moved the piano together. The lady and the 2 boys moved the piano. We've been wanting to move the piano to the other side of the sanctuary. They did that. And then she testified on the Sunday. It was this incredible act of power. And that began a whole series of people wanting to know about the claims of Christ, wanting to talk about Jesus and his power. And so we have a vital dynamic prayer meeting. And in the prayer meeting, there was a lady who was married to a guy who was non-Christian. She was a Christian. And we it was every Thursday she'd come in and she'd say, I want my guy saved. I want my guy saved. And he didn't know the Lord. Anyway, in the course of time, he became a believer. He accepted Christ. Now that's a long story by itself. And the church itself began to grow. It was packed out. We had 120 people in the sanctuary that could seat 60 people. It was just this crazy, and nobody wanted to add a second service because they'd been so small for so long. They didn't want to do anything other than feel the squeeze of all those people in the building. At any rate, it was lots of fun. It was a great way to start in the ministry. I was a young man in those days. And here's what happened to me. Over the course of time, I found myself compelled to call one of the great mentors of my life, Dr. John White, who wrote 27 books. Here's one of them. It's called Daring to Draw Near. This is People in Prayer and the People of God. It's an older book now. But back in the day, this book taught me an awful lot about praying. And every book the man wrote was helpful to me. He wrote all kinds of things about all kinds of topics. So he was a medical missionary. He was a medical doctor. He was a doctor of psychiatry. He was a sessional lecturer at a university. He was faculty at Regent College, Vancouver. And he was just this incredible, gentle, sweet man. And wouldn't you know it, my church in Northeast Alberta, which is 2.5 hours from the city of Edmonton over gravel road, that's the nearest airport, this guy flies in on his own dime because he felt commanded of the Lord to mentor me. Oh, my heavens. So he comes to I have to pick him up at the airport and drive him over the frozen roads to get to this. It was in February. This event was February. Anyway, he comes and the whole city comes to hear him. And we're talking about everybody in town wanted to hear this guy because that kind of a quality person doesn't come to a little town like that very often, especially if it's isolated. So I am basking in the warm afterglow of this. Now, backtrack a little bit. This lady who was praying for her guy to get saved decides to leave her husband after he got saved because he didn't change quickly enough. Shocked the whole community of faith. And to make it worse, she moved in with somebody who used to be Christian and had abandoned the faith, an apostate guy.
Oh, wow.
So my congregation was shocked root to the core because this girl did this. But the man was saved, and I had told him to read John's gospel to get started. So now, with that in mind, and all of the despair that was going on, you know, it's really hard to not run into people when there's only a couple of thousand people in your town. There's 2 grocery stores. You go to one or you go to the other, you're going to see them. When you walk down the streets are small, you're going to see each other. And I'd see this couple with the apostate guy and her holding hands walking down the road, and they would see me and walk on the other side of the street, and that kind of thing. It was this awful kind of thing. Anyway, it was just so weird because she had sensed the power of the Lord. She had participated in some of those miraculous events. There were several miraculous healings, several acts of power, several amazing things. And this lady up and leaves her guy and goes with an apostate. And oh, man. So now, against the backdrop of this huge event with Dr. John White happens, and 1/4 of the town hears him. A bunch of people get saved and filled with the power of the Spirit. Amazing things are happening. And he starts to mentor me, and he committed to mentor me for a year. It was amazing. So I am standing at the back door of the church just before I had to drive John White to the city to take him to catch his plane to return to his city. And the fella whose wife had moved in with somebody else sees me at the door. He shakes my hand and he said, "David, this is an amazing weekend." I said, "Yes, it really was. It was just incredible." And he said, "Well, I have been praying for you." And he's a new Christian. I mean, we're talking new. I said, "Oh, thank you very much." He said, "Yes, your car door was open. I put a present for you in the car on the passenger side of your car." I said, "Oh, okay, thank you." He said, "Yes, you'll see what it is. And if you can't figure it out, you call me and we'll talk. Here's my phone number." So this is what he put on my seat. A beautiful rock. And it's watermarked, and it's got little, it's got beautiful layers of rock. It's a sedimentary rock, and it's rounded and it's smooth. And it's really kind of nice. And I thought, it'll make a nice paperweight. It's kind of nice. Huh? So I looked at it, and he said, "There's a message for you in this rock." I thought, well, what's the message? So I looked at the rock, and it's got all these layers. And I don't know if you can see that. It's all these layers. So it's kind of pretty. Anyway. So, and it's smooth and it's round. And I thought, well, I wonder, there's a lot of layers to this rock. Is there a lot of layers to me?
Right.
Conversation filled with layers, So then I thought, well, it's a rock. Maybe I'm hard-headed, So
right.
I said, but the rock has been smoothed over. Maybe I'm a diamond in the rough. Maybe there's a diamond hut. I kept having these weird thoughts. And then eventually, after 3 or 4 days, I called him. And I said, "How you doing, fella?" And he said, "Well, I'm fine. Did you see the present I left on the passenger side seat of your car?" I said, "I did." He said, "Have you figured out what it means?" I said, "Well, no, I haven't figured out what it means at all." And he said, "Well, you told me to read the Gospel of John, didn't you?" I said, "Oh, yes, I know you." He said, "Well, I'm a slow reader, but I got to chapter 8. And I said, That's the story of the woman caught in adultery. He said it is. And all the men brought the lady into the church, and they had stones in their hands to throw at the lady because she'd been caught in adultery in the very act. And Jesus said, let him who was without sin throw the first stone. So I said to this man, are you telling me that I've thrown a rock at your ex-wife? He said, no, but your hand is raised. Drop the rock. So here's what happened. I kept this rock all these years. And there are many people who are sexually broken, who've made a whole series of sinful or stupid decisions. And they come to pastors because they want to figure out how to get straightened out. They want to figure out whether there's any hope for them. And I read the story in John chapter 8 of the woman caught in adultery. And by the way, she would have been stripped naked. And it was up to the husband who had been wrongfully treated to throw the first stone. In fact, we're coming up on Christmas in the recording time. I don't know when you're going to record this. Joseph would have had to have done that to Mary if he had found her guilty. And instead, he decided to move her away out of town when the angel spoke to him. But getting back to this, I was struck by the fact this is a new Christian. And he understood grace better than the seasoned pastor did. He understood it much better than I did. And so here's what happened. Our prayer meeting, where she had been so strong, started to pray that God would buy her back. And the atheist, the apostate guy, started to cry out to Jesus again after this woman started telling him stories. They went to a different church, but they came back to faith in Christ. There was a child in the union, and they were civil with each other as they cared for the child. And he went on to become the deputy mayor of that little town. And so it was an amazing story of the Lord's power to heal a damaged relationship. And the marriage wasn't saved. In fact, that guy who was the apostate did in fact come back to Christ. He did in fact marry the girl. And that man subsequently married again. They raised the child to adulthood. They did it without arguing to each other. But the power of Jesus to redeem applies to physical bodies. And that's the story of that single mom who had her back fixed. And there's a corollary to that story. It's quite hilarious. So we went to the same chiropractor. And this lady got healed, and then she went to her chiropractor for her regular adjustment to tell him that her back was fine. And he put her on the table, and he got mad because he was an ex-Christian, one of these guys who went to one of these churches and sort of gave up on the faith because he saw hypocrisy and not faith. So he knew about the Bible, but had never seen it lived. And I was his patient, and so was this lady. And I'd talk to him about the Lord, and he would just talk about all the hypocrisy he'd seen and so on and so forth. Anyway, she comes in and she said, Jesus has healed my back. And he didn't believe it. And he put her on the table and he overcorrected her back and was terrified at what he had done. And while she was on the table, her back corrected itself right in front of his eyes. And so the chiropractor came to faith in Jesus because she testified, and he treated me differently after that. So that, when these things, now I don't know if you ever notice this in the Bible, when a sign or a wonder is given, it's not given to an individual, it's given to a community. And I got to blow my nose here. Sorry about that. I have a bit of a virus. By the way, I do believe in medicine as well as in miracle. Anyway, getting back to this. So when my wife was miraculously healed of muscular dystrophy, it was an incredible story. And it was because a Ugandan bishop had come to my church. And we had, because my church had sent teams over there to rebuild the broken ruins of what had been the north part of Uganda. after that horrible Idi Amin and after that horrible Joseph Kony. And in the crowd were people who had had their hands cut off and their noses cut off and their tongues cut out. Horrible mutilation from Kony in particular. Anyway, we were there to help them rebuild. And this bishop came to my church. And he was given a word about my wife's affliction. And while he was saying it, Jesus miraculously healed her in front of my entire congregation. It was the most incredible thing. 650 witnesses to my wife being transformed from muscular dystrophy with failing muscles to somebody who was robust and healthy. Wow. That was incredible. Now, here's the corollary of the story. So in my Canadian congregation, everybody walked up to us and said, wow, congratulations. Isn't this amazing? This is incredible. This is astonishing. Now your husband, David, can travel. You can go with him. You can do your ministry together. You couldn't do this before. And, they thought it was all marvelous, and it was focused on the fact that she was healed. And I was, and still am to this day, a very, very, very grateful man for that. So I go back to Uganda, and there I am in one of the churches that we were assigned to help grow. And we tell the story. Now, I don't know if you've ever been to Uganda church. I'm a white guy. And I just, you know what? I mean, all the Africans start to dance their prayers. They pick up their chairs and they start to dance around the sanctuary. And if I try to do that, it looks like a white guy trying to be a Ugandan. No, it's just not a good idea. Anyway, we're watching this. And then they said, praise the Lord. God has visited your church. God has visited your people. Nobody said, you have received a great blessing. Everybody in the African church said, God has given you opportunity to share the faith with your city because of the remarkable thing that happened right in front of all those witnesses. And I thought, aren't they going to say congratulations? Aren't they going to say, isn't this nice? Aren't they going to say, how did it happen or whatever? No. The Canadians, and like Americans, were all focused on what happened to the individual. The tribals were focused on what happened to the community. So that night, my wife and I were reading our devotions before we went to sleep. We were reading Luke 7, and it was the account of the woman who had the widow of Nain. Jesus had just been preaching in Jericho. He was coming south, and they were passing with a big crowd of believers who were watching him do all these things. They passed by the town of Nain as there was a funeral procession to bury the widow's only son. Jesus is moved with compassion. He walks up to the coffin, places his hand on the coffin, tells the woman, stop your weeping, and says, young man, I say to you, arise. And the young man sits up and he's raised from the dead. Now, nobody in the crowd turned to the lady and said, congratulations, your old age retirement plan is now in place. Nobody says to the boy, congratulations, you've been raised from the dead. We don't know the name of the boy. We don't know the name of the woman. What we know is what the crowd said. And what the crowd said was, a great prophet has arisen among us. God has visited our people. It was exactly the same response as the Ugandans had. They were not focused on the gift to the individual. They were focused on what God was doing among his tribe, among his people. So when signs and wonders are given, they're not given to a person. They're given to a community. They're given to a family. They're given to a set of relationships. They're given to a region. And when he acts without dispute, in power, with people around them, this transforms a city, a region, in fact, a nation. In fact, the Bible doesn't say, go ye and make disciples of your neighbor. It says, go and make disciples of all nations. It doesn't teach us to focus on individuals. It teaches us to focus on winning people groups and tribes and villages and cities and towns and nations. And when an act of power happens, this is God's power. And it's not to be hoarded to an individual. It's to be shared with the many. So, I mean, in behind the writing of this healing prayer book, by the way, I can just say this to you. So, in that little church in northern Alberta, the little town was name was Lac La Biche. It's not the end of the world, but you can see it from there. And so, you're way down south. You're just on the north part of the tropics. This is where you are. This is at parallel 53, and it's very cold up there. And honestly, the road stops at that little town. And in the wintertime, there's an ice road to get to a northern community, but there's nothing else. It's the end of the road, really, quite literally. Jesus moved there in power to speak to the city, not just to speak to my little group of people and not just to bless the individual. And so the Lord transformed that man. And by his forgiving his wife, the Lord transformed that couple and the church that received them. The Lord transformed my community of faith through the way that that woman who was a single mom was miraculously healed. The Lord transformed me through that. I must tell you, because I'd never said those words before. Never dreamed that I would say, in the name of Jesus, get up and, touch your kneecap. It's crazy. You want to get someone sick, even worse. I never, and my church was transformed and all the relationships that all of them had because the town was small. All of them had 5 friends. They all told their 5 friends, and then they told their 5 friends, and it brought more people to the Lord. This is how the gospel is supposed to work. When a gift or a sign is given, it's given to the many and not just the individual. So that's the story of the mini revival at the beginning of my ministry.
Wow. Amazing. I know even the last time you were here, you have so many amazing, testimonies and whatnot. And I think it's great. Like on one hand, this is why I always talk about like the power of our testimonies. Like you just mentioned, it's not just about the individual, but it's about, sharing and the people you reach with the testimony and whatnot. And so
Yes.
I think that's amazing. And so yeah, look, congratulations.
Well, thank you.
Well, congratulations to the community, right? And congratulations to those that just heard. Now you guys can go and share and whatnot what you all have just heard and seen from Dr. David today.
That's just it. So the point is not. So I don't know if your listeners have been in a position where they've struggled with some issue, whether it's mental, emotional, spiritual, sexual, that's an affliction of the body, affliction of the mind. I'll just say this to you: there is hope. And when the Lord moves in your life, when he starts to give you even a smidgen of hope around what it is that you're dealing with, if it's clinical depression or if it's damaged emotions or if it's a wounded relationship or if it's being just idiotic and wasting things that God has given you and you want to redeem, or maybe you have a physical affliction and you've walked with Jesus for years, the Lord would bring you to a community of to move in power. And so we lost a lot of people from church during COVID. The attendance dropped way down. Why? Because they no longer felt obligated to be with their friends or whatever. And sometimes their friends dropped out and they dropped out together because they didn't like that community of faith, or they were there for the wrong reasons or whatever. But right now, as we're speaking, the Lord is starting to move again in a different way than he moved before. And you need people. Now so just be blunt with you. I had this viral bug. My daughter got it, then I got it. My wife's upstairs. She's lying down grunting because she's got it. We've been stuck in the house for a week and a half. Oh, I need people. So I want to get to church. I want to get to small group. I want to pray with people. I want to laugh with them. I want to be present in them. I want to do things with them again. Because the stuff of the kingdom is the stuff of sharing the love of God with people, even just by accepting who they are. And that's called the gospel. The gospel has to do with living and loving. And, God, Sex, and Love is the name of the title of your program. And there's great truth in the title. How did you come up with that title? I'm curious about that title. How'd that happen?
Yeah. Well, long story short, I feel like these are the things that God used to draw me back nearer to him, because those are things I desired. When I first got on YouTube and started just sharing as a Christian single horny woman, like, hey, is there anybody else out there like me? Basically, one of the first episodes I was like, these are things I think about all the time. I'm thinking about God, I'm thinking about sex, or I'm thinking about my career. That was the three things I said at that time. And to me, then I came back in the next episode to explain. I'm like, look, when I said sex, I meant like love, relationship, all the
You
stuff.
meant marriage,
But
yeah,
in
right?
my head, they were together. Yeah, like in my head, it was together though, right? And then eventually, when this concept of doing a talk show came into my mind, I thought of the name God, Sex, and Love, because I guess I had grown to understand separate the two between sex and love, and then also to just pretty much address, like, again, those were the three things really that I thought about all the time outside of like something in particular, having a conversation, living life. But then it's like when I was on my own and things like that, I would always be thinking about, okay, I want to please God, but at the same time, I'm single, and then I want to be married, and then I can't do nothing about, the horniness and just all of that type of stuff. And so, yeah, so it's pretty much my testimony in a title.
Okay. And so how long have you
But
been doing the podcast? How long has it been going?
yeah, I mean, well, I kicked it off in 2020, but it had been like in the works for years. Like I was getting stuff done, like getting in the process. Because again, I thought it was a talk show. So in my mind, I was thinking like, okay, this is going to be a platform, just talk, pretty much what we're doing now. But I thought that I was going to have a table, meet some women, whatever. We're just going to talk about and just basically create a safe, transparent space to talk about sex and just be open and transparent about every aspect of the Christian life and whatnot. And it is that, but at the same time, it seems like it's more than that. It's more than just a talk show, because it's like God, Sex, and Love is the umbrella, and then there's all these other shows and concepts that's under it right now. So
Sure.
including what we're doing now, the GSL talk show, I do Daily
Yes.
Inspiration, and yeah. So
Well,
I kicked it off with Daily Inspiration, but
yeah, so
God is just doing whatever He want to do.
yeah, no, I will say something about the way that relationship works. And I've said this to every couple that's ever come to see me because they want to get married. It doesn't matter if they're young or old. Doesn't matter if they're African or South American or if they're Caucasian or whatever. It doesn't matter, or if they're mixed race. And Canada is much more open to mixed race than Southern United States. But regardless of that, couples say, "How do we know if we should marry?" And the phrase I use is this: God will never distract you from Himself. And so if you are beside someone and they're distracting you from Jesus, that's the wrong person to get attached to. If you're witnessing to them, that's one thing. That doesn't mean you're romantically involved. But if you're in a place where you are considering whether this is a partner for life, you should, and listen, you need to be sexually attracted. Otherwise, you're bored. And if you're not sexually attracted, you have a different issue you have to deal with. Anyway, getting back to this, if the attraction happens, the person should also return the attraction, but there should be respect for the other person's body and their boundaries, the boundaries that the Lord has established. And sexual intimacy should happen inside the framework of marriage, because that's the way God ordained it. But regardless of this, if you're in a place where the person is drawing you closer to the Lord while you are with them, rather than distracting you from the Lord, you need to take a second look at that person and consider whether or not this is something that's going to take you to the place where you need to be. Because the whole purpose of marriage is not just so that you can be sexually satisfied. The purpose of marriage is partnership in the Lord, which includes sexual satisfaction. And it also includes sacrificial love. And there are seasons where sex can't happen because you're too sick or you're too old or your eyes are failing and your body's starting to fail and so on. So, the best example of this is the fellow who married Johnny Erickson. She's in a wheelchair. So Mr. Dada married Johnny Erickson because he loved her. Not because she was going to make him happy. Well, I suspect that she did. I think they had a marvelous relationship, and they still do. In fact, every now and then I'm astonished when I hear her talk about what's going on with her life. And that marriage is not based upon what he can get out of the girl. The marriage is based upon what they give each other in terms of reciprocity and satisfaction and friendship. And the most important part of the sexual relationship is that it's rooted and grounded in a covenant of friendship that endures until one of you dies. or both of you die. And so when I was telling that story about this man and this woman, the sad part was he did in fact come to Christ. She wanted him to change more quickly than he was able.
Mm.
And instead of regarding this as her covenant commitment, she broke that off, went off with someone who was a fast learner, but an apostate. And it distracted her from the Lord until we started to pray and the guy began to seek Christ again. That was the craziest thing. I mean, you want to talk about a sideways redemption. Oh, my heavens. It's kind of like the story of David in the Bible. When he messes around with Bathsheba and destroys a marriage and destroys the army's confidence in him and destroys the friendship with a fellow comrade in arms. And by the way, Bathsheba was the daughter of another one of the comrades in arms. And so he ruins the army. He ruins the trust bond. He smashes the marriage bond. He commits murder. He ruins his relationship with Joab, son of Zeruiah. And then Nathan the prophet is raised up to correct him around this sexual impurity. David repents, and then he writes scripture. He writes Psalm 51. Create in me a clean heart, O God. Take not your, don't cast me away from your presence. Don't take me away from your Holy Spirit. Restore to me the joy of your spirit, and then I shall offer sacrifices for thee. He writes the Bible after he smashed goodness. And if you look at what happens through David and Bathsheba, first child dies, other children are born. Solomon is born. And through the line of Solomon, Jesus of Nazareth comes. So when somebody's sexually an idiot, doesn't mean God can't redeem. The price was high. David's kingship was never the same after that. Solomon consolidated the kingdom, and it was the golden age of all things Israel. But through the line of Solomon, the adulterous union that God transformed and redeemed after the death, after the adultery, God caused something miraculous to happen. The birth of the Messiah. And if you're hearing this before Christmas, I would, what's really interesting is to look at the sordid background of all the people behind the scenes that led to the birth of the Messiah. There's good kings and there's bad kings. Manasseh's in there. That ugly, awful, horrible king is one of he's one of the ones of the line that leads to the birth of Jesus of Nazareth, who enters the world through this line from Joseph. It's just this crazy kind of thing. So God is a redeemer, even of sexual dysfunction, even of murder, even of something as horrible as the leader of a nation using the army to execute his, the wife of the girl he raped because he had to have raped her. That's what he did. She didn't want that. Thank you very much. She wasn't trying to do that. She was trying probably to save the life of her husband by consenting to it, but it was all the pressure was on. Actually, everybody in the court knew because David sent emissaries to get the girl. That means everybody in the court knew he raped her. Everybody. So, everything got slimed. Everything got ruined. Everything got manipulated. And that's why God raised up Nathan to correct him. Anyway, when the correction happened, it got written down in the Bible. So the redemption was public. So was the shame. So was the war. And so was the astonishing redemption of the birth of Jesus in the Christmas season. Wow.
Listen, have you ever thought about being a narrator or orator? You already, I guess, an orator of sorts, but you definitely have a way of, sharing not only the gospel, but your testimonies. So, I don't know if you want to do audio books and whatnot. You might
actually, this book is an audio book. Yes, it is. So
Oh,
you
there
can,
it is.
if you go to Amazon and go to audiobook, what's it called? They have an audiobook thing. You can download the audio and listen to it while you drive your car, right? So
Okay.
actually, there's two authors. I read most of it.
Ah.
And Maxie reads the story of the healing of his grandson. And
Mm.
so Maxie's a Southern gentleman, and he has the voice of a Southern gentleman. And so when you hear him, actually, you know what? In the North, we say "use guys" when we mean you plural. And in the South, you say y'all. And I think
Right.
y'all is a lot nicer than use guys. But
Yeah.
Maxie does two parts in this book. He reads the story of his grandson's miraculous healing. His grandson had nystagmus, which means his eyes are moving rapidly back and forth. His daughter, Kim, is a Methodist pastor. She's the head of Worldwide Methodist Evangelism. And Maxie was the former president of Asbury Seminary, and he's a prominent writer. He was the head of the Upper Room, and he's got a marvelous way of reading the story of his grandson's healing. And at the end of the book, he wrote the final chapter about 5 pathways to healing. So he names 5, and so his voice is in the story of the healing of his grandson. And my voice is in the other stories where I read the theology and I read the stories that I have involved in that. And so if people want to hear my voice, you can download it, but you'll hear Maxie. So I will tell you Maxie's grandson story. He was kind of afraid to tell the story of because he couldn't think of instant heals in his ministry. He's had this long time dynamic, but he remembered that his daughter Kim married a medical doctor, and his daughter Kim's very bright. She's a doctor now. She went off to London, England, got a doctoral degree, and so she's a very, very, very bright lady. Anyway, bottom line, they have a child. His name is Nathan. He's born, and she takes him to the doctor for some checkups, that kind of thing, because that's what all moms do. The doc sees that the eyes are moving rapidly. And so they're recommended to an ophthalmologist who looks in and says, yeah, he's got nystagmus. That means his eyes are not going to focus properly. And oh, by the way, he's got optic nerve hypoplasia, which means that his optic nerve was half the size it was supposed to be. And the child would probably be blind. And so, I mean, here's this lovely Christian lady married to a beautiful Christian doctor. They have a child. Child is, the doc said, now it might be possible for the kid to sit in front of the class and look at the things. He might have to go to a special school, but it was a terrible diagnosis. Anyway, Kim's husband, John Reisman, he gets a scholarship to do some advanced study at a different city. And so they move to Hartford, Connecticut, because he's going to study some deep things, and they have to get a new doctor. And everybody that Maxie knew started praying for Nathan's eyes. He was the pastor of a large church in Memphis. And so all these people in the church are praying for Maxie's grandson, and of course he's much loved and endeared to all of them. And they all know Kim because they watch Kim grow up in the church and all that kind of thing. So they're all praying because they love the family. Anyway, they moved because of this medical scholarship. They walk into a new doctor, and the doc examines the child's eyes. She has the files from the previous ophthalmologist. And he says, oh, the eyes are fine. Optic nerve looks healthy. Kim says, what? No, the eyes are fine, and the optic nerve looks good. And she gives the doc the file, nystagmus, optic nerve hypoplasia. The nystagmus had diminished to the place where it was almost not noticeable, and the optic nerves were healed. And as the book was released, just as the book was released, Maxie's grandson got married. And so everybody was talking about the miracle because all the people who were invited were there when he was sick and went to the wedding because he was well. So, I mean, you can hear those two stories. My story, you can hear where I told you last week about this fellow who teased me and made fun of me, and the Lord commanded me to pray for his healing. Last time I prayed. The story of Nathan's healing is the second story in the book. Then we talk about how do you go about prayer for healing? Is this biblical? How did Jesus pray this way? How did he pray this way? And then at the end of the book, Maxie in his Southern drawl talks about 5 pathways to healing. The first is the instant cure. And I've told you a couple of those stories. The second is natural healing. I mean, you cut your finger, you wash it, you put a bandage on it, thing heals. That's a miracle by itself. The third is a pathway to a remedy. And God guides you to a place where somebody's done research. And the next thing you know, They have learned how to treat that particular affliction. And listen, if somebody's given 30 years of their life and they're Christians and they prayed for a cure to this particular, and they give it to you, take the cure. Take it. It's a gift from God. It's not, they're not an antagonist usually. The fourth is where you're given the resources you need to carry on through with your affliction, whatever that happens to be. And the fifth is the miraculous crossing, where your time on earth is done. You have made your witness. You have carried out everything you were called to do. And you pass through the door of death to meet the Lord on the other side in glory. And by the way, God can combine all five of those. And I have been in situations where medicine and miracle have intertwined. I've been guided to a pathway to a remedy many a time. And I have seen the instant cure. And I've told you just a few of the stories over and over and over again. The Lord does this, especially when medicine runs out. When medicine has reached the limit and science tells you, we can't do any more for you. This is as much as we're able to do with what you have been granted. And there's all kinds of people in that situation. When the Lord moves in power that way miraculously, even the medical community sits up and marvels. So I had a paralyzed face. This story was put on the Christian Broadcast Network because it was a miracle. It was, you have to have a doctor's note to prove this. And I have a doctor's note. I had a shingles infection in my left ear. The result was that my whole face paralyzed except for the upper corner of my right side of my lip. I could not speak. I could not move my face. I couldn't close my eye. And I'm a Star Trek fan. Watch my eyebrow. Couldn't do that because my face was paralyzed. And it was a terrible thing. And when I went to, the story's a long one. I won't tell you all of it because we're going to run out of time before we run out of story here. I will tell you that the doctor inside the emergency ward, first of all, thought that I had flesh-eating disease because my face was paralyzed rapidly and I had a patch of red inflamed stuff growing across my face. They put me on intravenous antibiotic every day for a week. And it was the strongest stuff they had. And you know what? There must have been some sort of a secondary infection because the redness vanished over the course of time. And a week later, in those days, I didn't have a beard. I was shaving. And my face started to paralyze on the Sunday morning. My wife got me in the car, took me to the doctor. They thought I was having a stroke. And I have to tell you something. We're talking seconds. I got into the triage. They looked at me and boom, I was in the emerge immediately. But I brought a New Testament with me because I thought I was going to be a long wait in the emerge because I didn't realize that they were thinking that seriously. Anyway, there was 5 minutes between when I was admitted to the emerge and the doctor was beside me. 5 minutes. And I had enough time to open up the Bible to John chapter 5. John chapter 5 talks about the man at the pool of Bethesda. And this is a place where everybody who's sick and medicine has run out goes. They're all, and it did not escape me that I was in an emergency ward, waiting for treatment. There was all these sick people waiting for doctors, And Jesus walks up to one guy. He's been sick 38 years. Now, think that means if he got sick at 12, he's 50. And he's never worked a day in his life. He doesn't know how to handle a tool. He doesn't know how to, get up in the morning and put on his clothes and go serve customers. He doesn't know how to mix with the public. He doesn't know how to handle an instrument. He doesn't know how to bake a loaf of bread. He doesn't know anything. He's no skill. He's 12 to 50. That's a long time to be sick. And Jesus says to him, do you want to be well? I always thought that was a stupid question. What's he doing? But, because then I realized 38 years sick. He has to start at 50. And he has to start from scratch, Anyway, as the question is asked, the question it hit in my spirit, do I want to be well? And I'd raised my son, and my daughter was not raised. And I said, my son doesn't need me. My daughter does. Yes. And then you go further along in the story, Jesus heals the guy. He doesn't know who Jesus is. It's really quite remarkable. And then he's carrying his pallet on the Sabbath, and all the guys get mad at him. What are you doing carrying that thing? Anyway, after he carries that thing, they come to Jesus because he figures out it's him. And the Pharisees say, why'd you do that? And he says, I can do nothing unless the Father shows me. But the word he said to the paralyzed man was, you have been made well. Don't sin anymore so nothing worse comes on you. I read that scripture while my face was paralyzing. And as I read the scripture, I felt an increase in the Lord's presence, peace rising inside of me. And I had a gift of faith to believe that I would be made well. And Jesus healed my paralyzed face when the medical community told me I had no hope. I had Ramsay Hunt syndrome. And once you're past 50, you're not going to get your nerves back. It's not going to happen. And I was healed. Took a month. And every time I said that scripture through my paralyzed face, you have been made well, the Lord would heal me. I get a little better and a little better. So medicine ran out. I had nothing left. They couldn't treat me. And the surprise came. Here's what happened. This is what I'm telling you the story. The surprise came when I went to see the doctor. He was going to tap me into government programs and write a doctor's note to say that my paralyzed face made it impossible for me to carry on being a pastor or preacher. Couldn't do it. And so I went to see him, sat down in the doctor's office. My wife was there. And now my face had come back. And so I hadn't been able to close my eye for almost a month. And he sat down in the room and he said, how you doing, Dave? I said, fine, doc. How are you? Wink my eye, wrinkle my face. I can make my nostrils watch. So I did that with him, and my wife said, David, Chotka, stop that, stop that. She gave me the elbow. And he said, that's medically impossible. You can't do that. You have Ramsay Hunt syndrome. I said, Doc, I know it's medically impossible. I believe Jesus has healed me. And he sat back in his chair and he said, my wife's a good Catholic. I am not. He said, she believes in that kind of stuff. I'm a lousy faith guy. I'm a lousy faith guy, he said. And he sat back in his chair and he said, every second person of faith who comes into my office claims that God has done some miraculous thing. Usually it's a placebo effect and it doesn't last. In your case, I am prepared to admit that something has happened that medical science cannot do. And he wrote the doctor's note. I have it in a file. I could send it to you. I was healed of Ramsay Hunt. And I have a doctor's note for my wife's miraculous healing from muscular dystrophy. Same doctor. So here's what happened. 3 months after my face was healed, he was training an intern from one of the hospitals in the city. He was training an intern. And this was a really, really, really green intern. We're talking green as green could be. Didn't know how to put the little paper on the cup to look in your ear. Anyway, what he would do is he'd send the intern in to give it a shot. And then he'd come and follow up with his own thing. And then they'd compare notes in the hallway. And that's how he trained the intern. Well, the intern comes in and she does it. Actually, my wife was in the hospital this time. And she had a throat infection. She was going to get an antibiotic. And so, he looks at her and, makes the diagnosis. Oh, yeah, you got this particular affliction. You need a 7-day course of this particular antibiotic. If you take that, you're going to be fine. If you need an extension, I'll give you a repeat. And he does all this. He's standing in the hallway. My wife is, getting dressed back again after the examination. The door is closed, but she can hear. And so the doc says to the intern, oh, by the way, this is a particular kind of infection. There are 3 antibiotics that treat this. If it's a mild infection like she's got, you need this kind. If it's a medium, you need this kind. If it's a serious, you need this kind. He said, but I have to tell you something. Sometimes there are families where things happen that you just can't explain. This family is one of those. And then he told her about Ramsay Hunt and me, and he told her about her muscular dystrophy. Doctor became the evangelist. It was the most amazing and incredible thing. So those stories, now not all the stories I've told you are in the book, but stories just like that are sprinkled through the book, mixed together with teaching. And what I want to do is to empower, what Mexi and I both want to do, is to empower people to pay attention to the signals that God sends when prayer for healing is just about to happen. When God himself wants to use you as an instrument. And I'll just say this to you. There's been lots of times where I have not been used in prayer for healing while I was in the room, and somebody else wound up doing the prayer. Can I tell you one more story? This one's fun. You got time for one more?
Hey, yes, sir.
Okay, so
Yes, sir.
this one is 2019. I'll tell you this one. So I have been a prayer mobilizer with my denomination for many, many years, for more than 20 years, going all the way back to 2002. So it's 21 years. And every now and then I would teach cohorts of pastors. And I was asked to go to our French-speaking district in the province of Quebec in Canada, just outside Quebec City. And they're very French-speaking all through that province. And I have enough French to make myself understood on the street corner and order a meal, but I'm not fluent enough to preach. Anyway, the bottom line was there was a young man, 17 years old, in my congregation who was in a French immersion program, spoke English beautifully, spoke French beautifully, and he wanted to go to Quebec City to see it. I said, you can come if you allow me to train you in prayer. And he said, okay, I'll come. I'll do that. So him and his mom were both trained in prayer together with another lady named Maxine. And all of them, together with 5 or 6 others, took this course that I call the Transformed Prayer Course. And I was teaching them prayer principles and how to pay attention to the movement of the Spirit and so on. So we go to the Quebec district to teach. And I had been there 5 years before in 2014. And I had taught some of the stories that I told you at that event, some of the ones that had happened at that time. And there was a youth pastor there by the name of Pastor David. And he was a youth pastor. And right after the conference was held, after I told those stories, there was a youth conference. And there was a young man who had been one of these tough guys in a football field. And this, he was playing a football game and he got tackled and he didn't realize that he had broken a bone in his ankle. They gave him a shot of Novocaine and he ran on the broken ankle and really damaged his foot badly. They were actually it was so serious. They were concerned about amputation, but the guy was healthy as a horse, just really strong. But they put his leg in a splint and they said to him, you have to keep the leg elevated. You have to take the medicine and you shouldn't go to the youth retreat. And so the guy wanted to go to the youth retreat really badly. It was Christian youth from all across the province of Quebec in my denomination. There'd be about 150 youth there. And he said, if I keep my leg elevated and I stay in the wheelchair, can I go? They said, only if you promise to keep your leg elevated with that thing up in the air. So he goes to this youth event. Everybody's accommodating around him. And there were 3 youth pastors who'd been at the conference. And they looked at him and they said, why don't we ask Jesus to heal him? And so they all gathered around this guy. They prayed for him. He jumped out of his wheelchair and began to run across the floor with 150 youth watching. And they had never seen anything like that before. He went back to the doc and his bones were mended. Now, 5 years later, I am at the same district and some of the same pastors who'd been at the other event were there. And so I am being translated into French while I'm preaching. And they have a set apart prayer room for people who want to receive prayer for healing. The youth pastor's dad, Chrétien, is there. He wants to do a church plant. He's got a damaged back. He needs to he wants to be bivocational and run a business and be a pastor, but his health isn't good. And he comes to the event because he heard about what happened with his son and the miraculous healing at the youth event. And so he comes and he wants me to pray for him. And I don't speak French well enough to do this. And I have the young guy that I've trained. He's standing beside me. The man comes into the room and he starts to tell me about how he wants to plant a church and how he wants his back healed so he can run a business and plant his church. And I said, I can pray for you. And I'm being translated by the young lad. And we start to pray, and I can tell you this miracle. Nothing's happening inside of me. I don't sense any anointing. I sense no power. And I'm looking over at the young man. His name is Julian. He's physically shaking. His hands are vibrating. He's weeping. I said, Julian, I think the Lord has assigned you to pray for the man. He said, Pastor David, I've never done that before. I said, then put your hand on this guy's back and speak French. I'll tell you how to pray. And so Julian puts his hand on the man's back, and I said, say, in the name of Jesus, be straightened. So he says it in French, and the guy stands up. He's completely healed. He grabs the 17-year-old, spins him around the room and hugs him and starts crying and weeping. And the guy got healed by the 17-year-old when I was standing there coaching. So the whole point is that God does not want his glory to land on one person to make them the great pizzazz. The God wants to share his glory. The Lord wants to share his glory and cause all kinds of people to see that a gift has been given to the community. And it's not just through the hands of one person. It's through the hands of many. God is at work in miraculous and powerful ways. And I must tell you something. That young person had never seen anything like that before. And he got to be the agent through whom it happened. And Creighton told his church and told the district, and all the 80 pastors who were at the retreat heard the story. And they heard that it was not me, but it was the young man who prayed over him, and God could do this. And it became the basis to say, God will use whoever he wants, whenever he wants, at any time he wants, whether there's a seasoned vet in the room or not. It makes no difference. He'll use the novice instead of the seasoned vet from time to time, so that God gets the glory and not us.
I can sit here and listen to you and your testimonies and your stories all day, Dr. David.
Listen, I need a link to this because I want to share this one with my social media. So when you get this recorded, send it to me. And if anybody wants to be in touch with me, you can go to my website, www.spirit-equip.com. I do weekly sermons. I record them. And my YouTube channel is Spirit-Equip Ministries, 3 separate words. They can watch me there too. But I want to share this one in particular because I've told stories here that I haven't told in other podcast interviews. This is the stories that I told you for the most part are not in the Healing Prayer Book. There's many other stories in there. And by the way, you can get it anywhere books are sold. Anybody wants to learn how to do prayer for healing in church, you can pick up the book at Books A Million. You can get it on Amazon. You can go to Shop the Word, which is the website for Whitaker House. You can go to Books A Million. You can go to Barnes and Noble. They all sell the book. So it's all easy to attain, and it's not hard to read.
Well, it is truly an honor to have been speaking to you again and hearing your testimonies and these stories, that the ones that are exclusive to hear on God's Sex and Love platform. So, but yeah, thank you so much for your time. Is there anything else you want to share before you go?
Oh, I think we've covered the minefield, and all the mines are gone.
All right. Thank you so much for watching the GSL Talk Show, and thank you to Dr. David for joining us tonight. I hope that you all enjoyed the conversation. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And check out Dr. Chotka's book in any form, whether it be audio or the physical copy. Have a good night.